This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. And during this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together, until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me in my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no street signs or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of two stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area. Stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man, 30 to 40, started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems there by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a desert, and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat. As this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car had stalled and asked if I could help him out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked him if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes, so I agreed to, as gently as I could, push the car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, and then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way, but they start following me. So here I am, it's 9:50, I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light, except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave a couple of turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, crap. I'd take another turn that only leads to a couple houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I'd take another turn to loop around back to the gas station, and they follow me again, so at least I know they're following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of his car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate, and then I floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks and poof dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in the light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know that I couldn't see him behind the counter because he was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So, to the two drunk idiots that wanted to mess with 16-year-old me on my first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. I leave for work around 6 a.m. every morning. I live in a tiny town in Texas, so small we don't even have police. Nothing ever happens here. Until this morning. I left as they usually do, and the road I take out of town is a dirt road with no lighting. I usually don't see other vehicles, especially not behind me. This morning as I left, I noticed a car down the street with its running lights on, but I didn't think much of it. Until there was a vehicle behind me gaining on me with ridiculous speed for all the potholes on this dirt road. And then I realized the driver was trying to pass me. I have a healthy dose of paranoia, so this situation already had me on edge, and something in me said, don't let them get in front of you. So I didn't stop at the stop sign. The other driver proceeded to gun it around me anyway since I had reduced my speed, but since I never stopped, they couldn't cut me off completely. They then stopped in the middle of the road. I found myself pulling around the suspicious driver on the right, half off the road, and rolling down my window to ask if everything was okay. And that's when I noticed that the person in question had put the vehicle in park. They were halfway out of the driver's side door by the time I got around the front side of the vehicle, and our eyes met. I felt a moment of terror, realizing that if I stayed put, something bad would happen. I floored it and swerved around the front of the vehicle, crashing through numerous potholes to reach the highway. It was only a little ways off. He stayed on my bumper until I jumped into traffic, after which he stopped following and I called the county sheriff. They sent somebody to patrol, but it's doubtful that they'll find anyone. I drive a Nissan truck and the other driver was an older Tahoe or some similar SUV. I'm so shaken up that I called into work. I read that this happens all the time and I have thought, my life's so boring and I'll never have a post to contribute. But here I am. I had to write it all out because these scenes keep playing over and over in my head. Watching those headlights accelerate towards me. The fear I felt when they tried to start passing me or run me off the road. It was the scariest moment of my life when I looked into that man's eyes, like I could feel his intentions were to do me harm. Suddenly, I'm thankful for my boring life. So whoever you were this morning, let's not ever meet. Long-time lurker here, first time posting. I guess this isn't exactly something that happened directly to me, but something odd that I witnessed. This happened during the summer of 2017. Every weekday, I would wake up early, around 5 a.m. for a morning workout, and then head to my job. Generally, I would leave my house around 5:30, because my morning drive took around 25 to 30 minutes, giving me enough time for 2 hours before I needed to leave before my shift started. Most of my drive was just me putting loud music on, trying not to fall asleep, and it being the freeway before 6 a.m. Almost everyone was going at least 10 miles over the speed limit. I would drive most of the time on a main interstate before turning off onto a smaller highway, which I only used for a mile or so. This highway was 3 lanes on each side. People always drive fast on here, but usually not more than 75 miles per hour or more. And while you get some unsafe drivers in the morning, most people aren't swerving erratically. This highway runs north to south. An on-ramp from a main street becomes a lane, and then there are 2 entrances from the freeway that I would take every day. One from the eastbound side and one from the westbound side. I hope that makes sense, but basically, I got on from the eastbound side right as 3 cars from the westbound side are entering. One was some sort of orange sporty-ish car, and the other 2 were identical dark gray sedans. I don't remember exactly what make or model they were, but I remember them being fairly uncommon models. Not a sedan you would see 100 times a day. One was in front of this orange car, one behind. These guys were going at least 80 miles per hour. The orange car would change lanes, and the car in front would cut him off while the one behind him would change lanes to remain behind him. And they kept this up for the entire time that I was on the highway near them, weaving in and out of cars, not slowing down before I pulled off of my exit. This could be a complete coincidence and some asshole drivers, but I definitely got the vibe that the driver of the orange car was trying to get away from the gray cars. Maybe it was extreme road rage, or maybe something more sinister. Regardless, I'll never know. So, drivers of those gray cars, let's not meet. Okay, so this could have been nothing, but something about it felt so off. Some backstory. So last night, my sister, who lives 3 hours away from me, had somewhat of an emergency and asked if I would come stay the night with her. I packed my bags right away and headed there at 9 p.m. As I was about an hour away from my apartment, I realized that my car wasn't going to make it. The temperature gauge was rising and I didn't want to risk it overheating in the middle of nowhere. So I turned around, and when I'm about 15 minutes from home, my car overheats. At this point it's about 11:30 p.m. I pull off at an exit and wait for it to cool down, and then got back on the highway, but it did it again. So I pulled off onto the side of the highway. As I'm waiting for it to cool down, I tried to start it again and it wouldn't start at all. I'm a 23-year-old female, all alone, new to town, and my boyfriend was out of town, so I start to panic a little because I read so many damn Reddit stories. I managed to calm down and called my stepdad to let him know where I was and that I was going to call a tow truck. As I was on the phone with him, 2 cars pull off the highway right in front of me, and then one right behind me. My first thought was that they were going to help me, that they were all traveling together and needed to stop. But it was really weird that they pulled off at the same spot that I did, with one pulling in behind me. They all sat in their cars for what felt like forever, but was probably around 3 minutes. And then a man got out of one of the cars in front of me and started walking towards my car. He walked to the passenger side, stopped for 1 second, and then walked to the car behind me. This whole time, I'm describing what he looks like to my stepdad, just in case. He was then in that car for a while and walked back towards my car. And as he was passing my window, hit it with his knuckle, knocking once, and he kept walking. They then sat there for a while and then all left at once. I'm realizing as I'm typing this that it doesn't seem that weird, but being alone on the highway with 3 cars pulled off in front of you and behind you is a suffocating feeling. And I really don't understand why he felt the need to knock on my window as he was walking by. I'm not going to lie, it made me cry because it was just so bizarre. I'm hoping they were just pulled off to talk to each other and I was just overreacting. But regardless, let's not meet. This story takes place last April. I was a senior in high school. I lived my whole life in the Midwest, so I was always eager for spring break when I would vacation to somewhere more interesting. This year, I was going to Oregon with my friend Mary. Mary was 3 years older than me and dating my best friend Josh, who was attending the University of Oregon. She happened to be moving there the week of my spring break, so it was perfect for me to ride along. We set off on our journey on Friday night at 10:30 p.m. I know it's a weird time to leave, but it was nice to get through Chicago in the middle of the night to escape traffic. We spent most of Saturday driving through flat, boring farmland. We got to see the Badlands National Park, which was pretty cool, especially after such a boring day. At around 11 that night, we were both exhausted, so we called and booked a hotel in Montana, about 3 hours away. We were starting to enter the section of this part of the country that was pretty much just a ton of Native American reserves, when we turned down a long, beat-up road. Only one other car was on the road, and it was a large white truck that had been behind us for a while. We drove on this road for a few miles before this car started riding our ass. We slowed down to let him pass and he floored it. Again, us being exhausted, we saw this as an opportunity to get to our hotel faster. We figured it was a local that knew that he could speed without any trouble, so we sped down the road just a few miles per hour less than him to make our trip shorter. We came to a stop and he turned left, which we also happened to be doing. He pulled into a parking lot for a bar that was just on the corner as we continued, but he didn't park. He just waited, and as we passed, he pulled out behind us. Now, I'm a very paranoid person, so I told Mary that I thought he was following us. But she reassured me that he probably just didn't want us behind him, because some people are like that. I agreed and we kept on. I was still nervous, but I watched him turn off the road and my mind was at ease. Fast forward about half an hour, and Mary's starting to show obvious signs of exhaustion in her demeanor, so I offered to drive the rest of the way. She said, okay, and that she would pull off at the next chance. The problem was, the road we were on didn't connect with any other roads. There were no driveways or stores, or really anything except for wide open plains for miles. She decided to pull off the road to make the switch, but as she started to pull over, a bright set of headlights came up out of nowhere and looked like they were in the back of her car. This guy ran us off the road and we almost crashed. We came to a stop and both looked at each other like, what was that? But before we could say anything, the car from behind pulled off like 15 yards ahead of us, and it was the white truck from before. My heart sank and I said, Mary, don't get out of the car, just keep driving, do not stop. She was obviously weirded out at this point, but wasn't totally convinced that it was all that dangerous. But she saw that I was scared and started to creep back on the road. The guy ahead must have seen us moving as he started to drive too. We stopped again and he drove slowly, about a quarter mile up the road, turned off into a patch of trees and killed his headlights. I told her that I was sure he was following us. We had been driving forever, and what were the odds we had encountered each other again? She called Josh so we could get a third opinion. He was never the type to assume the worst, and he wasn't there. So he told us that it was probably a coincidence and that we should just keep driving and be wary. So we continued on for another 20 minutes without seeing him. But when we passed through another small town, I spotted him. He was sitting at a stop sign on the side of the road facing the road that we were on, with his headlights off. We passed by him. He turned his lights on and started driving again, right on our tail. At this point, Mary was convinced and she immediately called 911. We were in the middle of nowhere though, and her phone kept dropping the call. The dispatcher said they couldn't get a read on our location and asked where we were, but not even the map on my phone would load. We felt like we were dead already. He passed us again and I shouted for Mary to speed up so I could write his plate number down. We got it right before he sped off out of sight. The dispatcher was able to find us and told us to head to the nearest police station, about 20 minutes away. She also told us to not stop driving, and that this guy was a professional at what he was doing. She informed us that his tactic of passing us was so he could know where we were turning and going, so he could always be one step ahead. Fear sank into both of us when we realized that he knew exactly where we were, even when we didn't know where he was. We drove on, with him popping out behind us once more and again speeding off. I got to the police station and I pulled up on my phone and we were almost there. We stopped at the light where we were supposed to turn right, but we hadn't seen this guy in a while and this looked like the perfect road to sneak around on. I didn't tell Mary to turn, she kept driving. She asked me where it was and I felt guilty not telling her, so I told her that we had passed it, and then my phone hadn't loaded the directions until just then. She made a U-turn and we headed back. On the way there, we passed the guy. He was headed the way we were going before turning around, and we don't think that he saw us. We made it to the police station where they were expecting us and they sent cars out to find him. We got a police escort to our hotel, an hour away, and the rest of our trip was as normal as can be. We calculated that he had followed us around 60 to 70 miles. We don't know if he was caught nor do we know what his intentions were, but I still get chills whenever I tell this story, and whenever I see a similar white truck. Remember this story while taking long road trips, and don't forget to always check what's behind you.